For most of our zones, gardening is in full swing. Whether you're still seed starting, caring for the young ones, hardening off, or finally planting outdoors, the time to show off our green thumbs is right now. Eliminating last year's mistakes while improving on our past wins and successes is the name of the game here. At this point, summer comes fast, and any missteps that cost us time or opportunity can have a direct effect on our harvestable outcomes. So in case you missed it, here's volume 25 of the Garden Quickie, episodes 241 to 250. Enjoy. The best laid plans, a saying not really attributed to gardening. But it certainly fits sometimes, as evident by my poor cucumbers here. Things don't always go as we intend them, and no amount of planning or preparation can help when stuff is out of our control. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, let me tell you, stuff happens. And today's episode is all about that stuff. More specifically, how to expect the unexpected. I've got 3 ways to help new growers overcome such challenges. Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. Nobody likes it when something goes wrong. And when that something is an endeavor that you've already put time, effort, and money into, well, it stings even worse. The best way to handle this is to have a backup plan. Take my cucumbers here, for example. Just because my homemade starters went ahead and got frozen doesn't mean that I'm not going to have any this year. Even if it's too late to make more, which it probably isn't, I could easily go and buy a couple of cucumber starts from the store when they bring them in. Yes, my initial costs do go up, but this way all is not lost. Even better than a backup plan though is a backup crop. And this is especially handy later on in the season when maybe replacing the cucumbers isn't so feasible. If you have a plant or crop failure and it's mid to late season and there isn't time to replant it, shift gears and plant something else that grows much faster. Cucumbers kick the bucket? Plant some lettuce. Tomatoes fail mid-season? Put in some new spinach. Think of it as rescuing the space and getting some valuable time back rather than the individual crops. This way, you're always progressing and always moving forward. And lastly, shifting gears a bit here, we need to document everything, especially our challenges. Gardening and growing your own food are types of activities that we learn far more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. Keeping an ongoing and detailed record of any missteps or mishaps that happen throughout the season can provide valuable direction in avoiding the same mistakes in subsequent years. I built a 5-page template of the one I use here, and I've included it as a free download in the description below. Check it out if you're just getting started. It's completely free. And after that, don't forget to check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. As a crop that's rarely direct seeded, tomatoes are grown indoors in the early spring from tiny seedlings all the way to vigorous upstarts. Either store-bought or ones you make yourself at home, the countdown is on to getting these guys out into the garden. But as we all live in different zones and different climates, how do we know when we're supposed to do this? How do we know when it's the right time? Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we'll make sure your tomatoes are well taken care of. And today's episode is all about our tomato starters. Store-bought or homemade, when is the right time to plant them out in the garden? Hey, time's short as you know it is, so let's dive in. Unless you live near the equator with year-round tropical temperatures, the planting of all crops, not just tomatoes, is timed around 2 specific calendar dates. These being the first and last frost dates of the year, which occur in the fall and spring respectively. For planting tomatoes, we're more interested in that spring date, also known as your last spring frost date. As the danger of frost at night subsides, the average temperatures begin to warm up. And seeing as tomatoes are actually a tropical plant from Central South America, well, this is their time to shine. When your last spring frost date is passed and the soil temperatures stay consistently above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you can go ahead and plant your hardened off tomatoes out in the garden. Some growers will wait until at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit, as temperatures even slightly below 50 can prove fatal for tomatoes. Either way, look at the extended forecast and warming trends for your area to make the best informed decision. And while you're doing that, make sure to check out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Big or small, young or old, vigorous plants are hungry plants. And that's certainly the case with all varieties of tomatoes at every stage of their life. As the #1 grown backyard crop, right around now is when we start seeing racks and racks of tomato starts just about everywhere. At home or in the store, monster growers in a relatively small amount of soil, quickly running out of food. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we make feeding your tomatoes easy. And today's episode is about just that, feeding tomatoes, specifically the 4 to 8 weeks between germination and planting outside. Time short as you know it is though, so let's dive in. In the beginning, tomatoes come up with gusto, and they don't need much from us other than moisture and light. The first leaves, known as cotyledons, are not really photosynthesizing, as the plant is still living off the seed. In fact, it's not until about 2 to 3 weeks after germination that we begin to even think about feeding our tomatoes. Grown in a seeding soil mix that has little in the way of nutrients, young tomatoes need to be fed once they get their second set of true leaves. Like we said, this is about 2 to 3 weeks after that initial germination. Now, since they don't really make a seedling-specific fertilizer, we can go ahead and take a regular liquid balanced mix and just use it at half the recommended strength. Read the instructions, dilute to half the dose, and feed from the bottom up and let the soil soak up all the goodness. Now, around a month in, and your plugs are probably getting pretty restless. If you've planted in small cells like this, quite likely you're thinking of moving them on to a bigger home. Normally, a quality potting mix is used at this time, and it'll most likely contain a moderate amount of nutrients. Consider this as another feeding. Transitional uppotting aside, the recommended schedule for feeding young tomato plants is once a week. That could be anywhere from 6 to 8 feedings total until you plant them outside. For me though, I feed my young tomatoes much less, at once every 2 weeks. Not to mention, I always repot my plugs at the halfway point, so really, I'm only feeding my tomato starts twice during their whole lifetime indoors. It's still plenty of food for the plants, and it leaves us more time to check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. One plant you can tell is going to be rewarding and easy to grow just by looking at the seed is, of course, dill, an amazing herb in the celery family that rarely gives us any trouble at all. Robust seeds followed by even more robust growth. The way in which you harvest your dill, though, will dictate how much and how often you'll be eating it. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, there's no such thing as too much dill. And today's episode is all about this amazing herb. More specifically, 3 ways you can harvest your dill. Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. Aside from those aromatic seeds used for pickling, the pungent foliage of dill, fresh or dried, has no equal. Our motto is always fresh is best though, and that leads us into our first way to harvest your dill, and that's selectively. As mentioned, dill is a robust plant, and taking the outer sprigs and stems does the plant no harm, so you can keep coming back to harvest over and over again. Although I've mass planted this particular planter here, the selective method for harvesting dill actually works better with larger, single stems that have been allowed to branch out. Our next method of harvesting actually takes advantage of this planting style, and that's mass harvesting. Like with selective harvesting, ideally we'd like to come back again and again and cut more, but to do that with this style of harvesting, you've got to be careful. Let me show you what I mean. New dill shoots arise from the centers of 2 or 3 already established stalks. It's a growth strategy of many plants. As long as that new center shoot stays alive and intact, the plant will continue to grow and thus produce. So, if we cut and stay above that magic line, even harshly like this whole planter of dill will grow back in about a couple weeks. And lastly would be to cut for no more harvest, and that would be to simply cut the plants down below that active grow line all the way down to the soil, effectively harvesting to end the crop completely. To get more dill at this point, well, you'd have to plant more. And after you do that, make sure to check out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Sowing, germinating, maintaining, and potting our young seedlings has been a lot of work. It's been completely worth it, as they've never looked better. But that doesn't mean we're totally out of the woods just yet. With one obstacle left, the journey from inside to outdoors can be an arduous one, especially if we don't take our time and the right precautions. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we're with you and your plants from start to finish. And today's episode is all about those young plants. More specifically, 3 key tips to help us successfully harden off our seedlings this spring. Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. So what do we mean when we say hardening off our plants? And why is this something that's so important that we have to do it every spring? For those of you new to the game, hardening off is simply the gradual acclimation of soft, lush, indoor seedlings to that of outdoor life. It's important because without this process, our seedlings can easily falter, if not fail completely, as the outside conditions shock their systems. When we break it down, there are 3 main environmental factors that are of most concern: temperature, air motion, and light intensity. Like we just mentioned, the gradual acclimation of all 3 of those factors is our first key. Hardening off and getting used to the infinitely harsher conditions outside doesn't simply happen overnight. It's a minimum 2-week process that starts off slow, then gradually ramps up. Dappled shade in a sheltered area for 2 to 3 hours at first, followed by increasing sun intensity, time, and exposure in the days following. And to ease into this and take out as much of the user error as possible, we try to start this process on the right day. Calm, cloudy, or overcast days that are above 60 degrees Fahrenheit seem to work the best. Plants grown exclusively indoors have no resistance to wind, wild temperature swings, or even direct sunlight. So, yes, take it slow, but also pick the right days. And even more important than this, and our third key to successfully hardening off your seedlings, is the overall timing in which you do it. If hardening off your seedlings is a 2-week process, then it makes sense to start it 2 weeks before your outside planting date. Too early, and it's likely too cold and too harsh out to harden off your plants anyways. But too late and we miss that valuable growing time outside to achieve those biggie harvests. Timing, along with the gradual acclimation on the right day, is truly the secret sauce. Master these 3 aspects of hardening off, and you'll have no problems making the switch to outdoors this spring. Just make sure to leave enough time to check out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. In the beginning, basil is our friend. It sprouts fast and easy, and harvestable foliage is ready before you know it. All is well with this popular herb until it isn't, because just as fast and easy as basil grows, these things can appear out of nowhere. Bolting in herbs, while part of the natural life cycle, is not usually a welcome sight, and we gardeners try to delay it for as long as possible. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we keep your bolting basil to a minimum. But today's episode is all about it. Specifically, 4 ways that you can delay flowering in basil so that you can enjoy it longer. Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. As gardeners, don't get us wrong, we absolutely love flowers. For our tomatoes, peppers, zucchinis, and of course strawberries, it means food. For those types of crops, flowers are a complete necessity. But for some herbs, like basil, where we harvest only the leaves, unwanted flowering, known as bolting, spells the end of the crop. Reproduction by flowering is the end of the basil's life cycle, and thus the end of all that tasty foliage. So, we try to prevent it, or at least delay it whenever possible. And the first way to do that is to plant it in the right spot. Cool, shady spots that sit between 65 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit seem to work the best, as do growing in the stable temperatures of indoors. Make no mistake, it's the intense midday heat that's the main cause of bolting. So if we can mitigate that right off the start, well, we're already in the win column. One of the reasons that intense midday summer heat causes bolting is the intermittent drought that comes along with it. And it makes sense. Think about it. If a plant thinks it's going to dry up and die, it's going to want to reproduce as fast as possible to ensure future generations. Unless our intent is to collect and save basil seeds though, that does us no good. So, keep the soil cool and moist, but never soggy, and you'll stave off bolting much longer. As flowering and bolting is the reproductive part of a basil's life cycle, exploiting and supporting the vegetative part can often delay it. And we do this by avoiding balanced fertilizers, instead skewing higher in nitrogen. In your typical NPK, N, or nitrogen, is the first of the 3 numbers on the front of any fertilizer bottle. Ensure that number is higher than the other 2, and you'll be harvesting basil foliage instead of basil flowers. And lastly, our 4th and final way to battle the bolt is to simply cut. Cut the flower stalks as you see them and send those plants back into a vegetative state. This works well with all herbs, but especially with basil. Coincidentally, this is also how we harvest this plant, so this one should be super easy. Almost as easy as checking out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. It's hard to find something as rewarding as pulling up your own sweet, homegrown carrots. An unseen bounty until harvest that's a delight every time. I just wish it didn't take so long to actually get some carrots. Seed to harvest, carrots are one of the longest non-flowering crops you can grow, and they're almost never as fast as their package suggests. Nothing overly hard or complicated, just requiring some patience and a bit of time. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, despite the limited time, we still love our carrots. And today's episode is all about them. Specifically, 3 reasons why carrots take so darn long to grow. Time short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. You know you're in for the long haul with carrots right off the bat, because germination time for pretty much all the varieties is uncomfortably long. Makes sense, as the little seeds are quite tough and they drop off the flowers naturally while it's still warm out in the late summer. But instead of germinating right away, those seeds lie dormant all through fall, winter, and well into the early spring. So already our crop time is ticking, simply waiting to even get started. And when our fine carrots do come up, the foliage is just that, fine. Unlike a similar root crop in radishes that seems to grow at warp speed, these guys unfortunately do not. Carrot tops, the leaves that support the plant, are quite fine and delicate and lend themselves to a slow-growing nature. Without that huge canopy of broad leaves to capture light and energy, growth is just inherently slower. Not to mention bulbous and swollen taproots are always long to form. Potatoes, yams, ginger, and beets all seem to take their sweet time. Carrots, though, often take even longer, once again due to their life strategy. The taprooting carrots, i.e. the carrot itself, is a necessary storage of energy. Energy to carry this biennial plant through winter to a flowering cycle the following spring. Slow to grow, yes, but with a reproductive purpose. And that's okay though, because while we wait for those crunchy carrots, it leaves us more time to check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. It's the first thing to come up in the spring to get us excited about the coming season. As lush and attractive as the foliage is, strawberry plants are nothing without their flowers. White, pink, and even bright bold fuchsia, strawberry flowers are the necessary precursor to getting that fruit that we're after. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we're strawberry obsessed. And today's episode is all about them. More specifically, 3 ways to get more strawberry flowers this year, as well as how to get more out of the ones you already have. Time short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. Despite showing up visibly well after those first spring leaves, it's actually the strawberry flowers that come first, as they're formed way back in the fall. The drop in temperature and light hours stimulates the strawberry mother plants to cease leaf and runner production, switching instead to making those dormant flower buds. 2 things we can do in the fall to maximize this and the number of quality flower buds we get is the post-harvest fertilize and to limit that fall pruning. Let me explain. Strawberry plants are usually only fed twice a year. Once in the early spring well before fruiting, and then once again after the harvest to help the mother plants recover. Nothing fancy, just a nice balanced liquid mix to help set up those adult plants for winter dormancy. With pruning, if we know that the flower buds are formed and set in the fall, then we have to be extra careful with any aggressive trimming. Doing these two things alone means that we'll be going into spring with as much flower power as we possibly can. And speaking of that fertilizer and flower power, at least 4 weeks before flowering and fruiting, our strawberry plants should have that spring feeding like we previously talked about. Not all buds become viable flowers, and adequate nutrition is needed to maximize the blooms to come. And just as not all buds bloom, not all blooms are guaranteed to become that eventual strawberry. Pollination is key, and without it, the flowers are simply a dead end and won't produce. While strawberry flowers are quite showy and do their thing, attracting pollinators with other flowering crops is going to ensure more berry goodness come summertime. Simple stuff, which is great, because that's going to allow us more time to check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. When you let most fruits and vegetables sit around for too long, bad things happen. Rot, mold, decay, and generally the end of life. Not so with onions, and it's pretty amazing. Not only does this crop store for an extremely long time, pushed even further, and it'll actually begin to regrow itself. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, we've pretty much seen it all with onions. And today's episode is all about them. More specifically, how and why do onions sprout and regrow months after we harvest them. Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. For most of our fruits and vegetables, harvesting is the end of the line, the final resting place between consumption and or before finally being returned to the earth as compost. Many contain seeds that'll spawn future generations, but they themselves will never grow again. Except onions. Just a little bit of heat and moisture, and most bulb onions can be stimulated to start growing again. Actually, most times we don't even need to do anything, and the onion bulbs will go ahead and sprout all on their own. But why is that? To explain this phenomenon, all we need to do is look at the onions themselves, specifically their life cycle. Onions that are grown all the way from seed are planted and germinated in the spring. They grow relatively quickly, and eventually by mid to late summer, they form a bulb. This is when we harvest them. It may be the end of the line for the crop, but for the plant itself, it's only halfway through its life cycle at this point. The bulb, what we covet so much with the harvest, is actually the onion plant's storage locker for energy. Energy to carry it through winter so that it can flower and reproduce the following spring. As you can see, onions are biennials, specialized plants that use a winter dormancy as a halfway break in their lives to prepare for flowering and then reproduction. Bulb onion harvests that are stored for consumption simply think that the winter break is over and resume their life cycle and start regrowing. Not much benefit to us, as that bulb is not going to get any bigger, but it doesn't ruin the harvest and they're perfectly fine to eat. Just as you're perfectly fine to check out more episodes of the Garden Quickie. Some plants were just born to reroot themselves. A no-effort endeavor other than a glass and some water, and you have new plants for free every time. Crops like this basil here, as well as thyme, green onions, and even rosemary. However, not all plants share in this rooting success. Plants that you'd think would be absolutely great at rooting because of their vigorous nature and their quick-growing life cycles. Cilantro, sage, and in this case, dill. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome back to another episode of the Garden Quickie, the show where in 2 minutes or less, it's our job to root out the bad rooters. And today's episode is all about them, specifically dill, and what makes it such a poor candidate to root its cuttings. Time's short though, as you know it is, so let's dive in. When a plant is cut off from its root system, two things happen. One, it either dies, or two, it tries to create a new set of roots. The ability of a plant to do this is genetic, and not all species are going to be able to form new roots. Long, skinny, branchless stems are notoriously hard to get rooted, and this gives us our first clue as to why. The rooting ability in cuttings, essentially creating adventitious roots, is a juvenile trait. Now, not to get too scientific, but plants, just like us, are made up of many different kinds of cells. One such cell type, called cambial cells, are unique in that they're undifferentiated, meaning they haven't turned into their final cell type just yet. Cambial cells have the ability to turn themselves into xylem, phloem, meristems, or as you can guess, root cells. Really, whatever the plant needs. Crops with shorter leaf nodes and more foliar branches tend to have more cambial cells in their stems, and thus a greater ability to root themselves. It's why you can't cut a blade of grass and stick it in water and expect it to keep growing. So, while it's not impossible for dill or even cilantro to root themselves from cuttings, it's infinitely harder because of a lack of these cambial cells. What isn't infinitely hard, though, is checking out the next episode of the Garden Quickie. Thanks for watching, guys. And hey, if Garden Quickies are your thing, make sure to subscribe and click on this playlist here as we explore and solve more growing issues in 2 minutes or less.